Welcome to week 2. This week's lesson is all about fractions. Week 2 objectives: reading fractions, understanding the value of fractions, changing fractions from one form to another, creating equivalent fractions, addition of fractions, subtraction of fractions, multiplication of fractions, and division of fractions. Before you begin this week's lesson, let's take a look at some of the key concepts. The value of fractions. A fraction is a portion of a whole number. It describes into how many parts a whole is divided. A whole unit can be divided into any number of parts or fractions of a unit. For example, we can cut it in half, in quarters, or in eighths. 5/8. The denominator is the bottom number of a fraction. It states into how many parts the whole unit is divided. So this circle is divided into 8 parts. The numerator is the top number of a fraction. It states how many parts are concerned. So we have 5 parts that are in question. Types of fractions. We have proper fractions. In a proper fraction, the numerator is smaller than the denominator. Improper fractions. Improper fractions, the numerator is larger or the same as the denominator. And we have mixed numbers. Mixed number has a whole portion and then the fractional portion. Next, changing improper fractions to mixed or whole numbers. Let's use 7/3. 7/3 means 7 divided by 3. So this fractional bar means divided by. So 7 divided by 3. 3 goes into 7 2 times. 3 times 2 is 6. 7 minus 6 equals 1. Your remainder 1 becomes your numerator for your fractional part. And then your denominator is your original denominator that we started with over here. And that simply becomes the denominator for the fractional part of your mixed number, 2/3. Let's try another one. 18/6. 18 divided by 6. 6 goes into 18 3 times. 6 times 3 is 18. We subtract that with a remainder of 0. So we have a whole number 3. Let's try changing mixed numbers to an improper fraction. We have to go both ways. So let's use the mixed number 4 5/8. Step 1. We take the whole number 4 and we multiply it by our denominator 8. So 4 times 8. 4 times 8 is 32. So we take the product 32 and we add the numerator to it. So we have to do plus 5. So 32 plus 5 equals the 37. 37 is our numerator. We pop it over top of our denominator 8. So 37/8 is the improper fraction of 4 5/8. Let's try another one. 3 7/12. 3 times 12, which is whole number times the denominator, 36. We take the product, which is 36. We add the numerator, so plus 7. 36 plus 7 equals 43. We have 43 as our numerator. Our denominator is our 12. So our improper fraction is 43/12. Okay, need to talk about equivalent fractions. An equivalent fraction are different fractions representing the same value. Equivalent fractions are found by multiplying or dividing both the numerator and the denominator by the same value. So whatever we do to the numerator, we must do to the denominator. Let's take a look at the 3/5. I'm going to divide, let's start with multiplication. I'm going to multiply the 3 and the 5 by 2. So 3 times 6. 3 times 2 is 6. And then doing the same with the denominator. 5 times 2, 10. So 3/5 equals 6/10. Let's do the 60/75. This time I'd like a smaller equivalent number, and so that requires dividing. We have to divide both the numerator and the denominator by the same value. And that value must be a multiple of both numbers. That means that number has to be able to be divided evenly into both. I'm going to use the number 5. 60 divided by 5 is 12. 75 divided by 5 is 15. So 60 75ths, equivalent fraction, 12 15ths. Let's do another one using the 3/5. This time I'm going to multiply both sides by 5. So 3 times 5 is 15. 5 times 5, 25. 3/5 equivalent to 15 25ths. Again, down below, using the 60 75ths, I'm going to divide this one by the multiple 3. 60 divided by 3, we get a new numerator of 20. 75 divided by 3, the new denominator of 25. So 60 75ths equals 20 25ths. Okay, next, let's talk about factors. Factors are any set of numbers that will equal a given number when multiplied together. So let's use the number 48. A set of factors for 48. 6 times 8. 6 times 8, two numbers that, when you multiply them, equal 48. Another set, 3 times 16. 2 times 24. 2 times 3 times 8. These are all sets that equal, when multiplied together, 48. More efficient factoring sometimes is needed, and so we need to do prime factors. So I want to prime factor 48. Before we do that, let's just talk about what a prime number is. A prime number is a positive number that can be exactly divided only by itself in the number 1. So a number that can be divided by itself in the number 1 only. Here's a list of the first 10. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, and 23. Those are all prime numbers. So now that we know what a prime number is, let's go ahead and factor out 48 with prime numbers. So when I start to do this, I just pick any two numbers, any two factors of 48. So 6 times 8. The 6 and the 8 are not prime numbers, so I need to refactor each of these. So I'm going to factor the 6, 2 times 3. I'm going to factor the 8, 2 times 4. Let's take a look. 2, prime number. 3 is a prime number. 2, prime number. 4 is not a prime number. So I'm going to refactor the 4, 2 times 2. I now have all prime numbers. And so 2 times 3 times 2 times 2 times 2 equals 48. Let's take a look. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 2, 24. And 24 times 2, 48. These are the prime factors of 48. Okay, now that we can do prime factoring, let's look at the rules for reducing fractions with prime numbers. First step, find the prime factors of the numerator and the denominator. 2 times 2 times 3 times 5, prime factors of 60. 3 times 5 times 5, the prime factors of 75. After we've done that, we cancel factors common to the numerator and the denominator. The 2's, they're not in common, so I go to my 3. 3's in common for both the numerator and the denominator, so I cancel out the 3's. Next, 5, common in both, cancel out my 5's. I'm now ready to rewrite as a reduced fraction. 2 times 2, my new numerator, 4. Canceled out everything by the 5, so my 5 is my denominator. 60 over 75, or 60 75ths, is equal to 4/5. Okay, Next, we need to talk about changing fractions to equivalents with a common denominator. This becomes key when we want to add and subtract fractions. And so a common denominator is a denominator that is common to all concerned fractions. When all fractions in a problem have the same denominator, they're said to have common denominators. So right now, my fractions 1/2, 3/4, 5/8. They do not have a common denominator. So we need to find a common denominator. And so we can do this by just sort of looking at them. A common denominator, each of my denominators, I have to find a number that those numbers will each divide into evenly. So right now I just look 32. 2 goes into 32 16 times. Does 4 go in evenly? Yes, 8 times. And 8 can go into 32 4 times. So 32 is a great example of a common denominator. But before I use that number, I like to just inspect a little bit further to see if I can find a smaller common denominator, or the lowest common denominator. And what I can do is I can look at these and see if there's something in common with these. Now my 2 and 4 can never be the common denominator, because remember, the number has to be able to divide evenly. 8 is not able to divide in 4 or evenly into 2. Just can't happen and have a whole number. But I look at my 8, so I go to my largest denominator and see if my other two numbers divide in evenly. The 2 does and the 4 does. And so I have the common denominator of 8. Although I could have used 32. I just like the smaller. Okay, so now that I've decided what a common denominator is, I have to divide the common denominators by the original denominator. So 8 divided by 8, I have my 1. So another way, 8 times 1 equals 8. Whatever I do to the denominator, remember, I have to do the numerator. So 5 times 1, we have a new numerator of 5, or in this case it's the same because we're using the 8. I look at my 3/4. I look at the denominator. 4 goes into 8 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. I have to do the same. 3 times 2, new numerator 6. And finally I look at my first, my 1/2. 2 goes into 8 4 times. 2 times 4 is 8. I must do the same for my numerator. So 1 times 4 is 4. And I have found my equivalence with a common denominator. Okay, great. We're ready to move on to tips for a successful week. Number 1, do not procrastinate. Log in each day. Let's get the job done. Complete all reading assignments. Watch the videos. These are excellent tutorials. 4, submit this week's assignments by Sunday. 5, contact me. I am here to help you. If you need any help, you cannot contact me enough. Find my contact information on the syllabus. I'm waiting to hear from you. Let me help you cross the finish line